My name is Audra Quinn. I'm managing editor of the Graziadio Business Review, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Joetta Forsyth, who is a professor of finance here at the Graziadio School of Business and Management. Dr. Forsyth earned her master's degree at the University of Chicago and her PhD at Harvard Business School and Economics Department, where she concentrated on finance and industrial organization. Most recently, Dr. Forsyth has been focusing her efforts on writing a personal finance textbook for gifted young adults ages 16 to 22. The book is titled Financial Wisdom: Personal Finance and Career Skills to Guide Teens and Young Adults on Their Journey to Success and Happiness. Along with the book, Dr. Forsyth has developed a curriculum for high school students, as well as online courses to train high school teachers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Forsyth.
You're most welcome.
Good. So tell me first of all, what motivated you to write this book for a younger audience?
Well, to do that, I have to start with some historical context. It used to be, say, in the 1800s or the early 1900s, that kids worked on their family business or farm, and that's where they learned how to manage money, they got business skills, they learned how to take care of themselves. But eventually, Dad and then even Mom went out and joined the workforce. And when they did that, these kids stopped getting financial training and their schools did not fill in the gap. So something really important got lost, and kids these days are no longer trained in something that's incredibly necessary in order for them to be happy and succeed in life.
Right.
So I see these kids heading out the door and getting into serious trouble in one way or another. And oftentimes they can't dig themselves out of a hole they've created until they're in their 30s or later. My son was also getting ready to go to college, and I wanted to make sure that he got plenty of finance training before he headed out the door. What kind of a finance professor and parent would I be if I didn't give him training? So I went and looked for a good personal finance textbook for high-achieving teens, and I simply didn't find one. You know, and frankly, a lot of what I found looked like hundreds of pages of tax codes. It was all in black and white, and it was extremely dry. So I see people going out and making mistake after mistake and harming themselves. You know, the financial crisis is an example of that, because they don't know how to handle their money, and it's very serious, and it's something that's really important in kids' lives. So I decided to do something about it. So I have written a textbook for high-achieving teens. It's quite rigorous. It would be plenty challenging for any adult, frankly. And it goes from A to Z through what they need to know in order to be successful and manage their money and grow wealth. For instance, they do financial forecasting in Excel. They'll forecast saving for retirement. They'll forecast buying a house, and they forecast saving up to for college for a child. There are detailed chapters on retirement planning, you know, saving for college, and a whole host of other things. In fact, when your teenager gets done with this textbook, they'll be able to have sophisticated conversations with financial advisors. And in fact, if they go take out a loan, they'll probably understand the loan better than the loan officer. Right. So it's a demanding book for bright teens, but it's also, I think, very fun. So I didn't want it to be, you know, look like 200 pages of tax forms. And so what I did is I filled it with lots of colorful graphics and pictures, but even more importantly, I filled it with stories. You know, young people are really curious about what goes on out there, and a lot of times the parents don't tell them what happened at the office and all these other things, but they're actually quite curious. So what I did is I created short story after short story in these boxes, and I put them everywhere throughout the textbook, and they're meant to be entertaining. And a lot of them are funny or shocking, but they're, I think, very enjoyable, and they make the material really come alive. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. I could give you a lecture about how you shouldn't mess with the IRS, or I could tell a story about Billy Carter, the overall-wearing, Billy beer-drinking Southern boy who happened to be the brother of the president, and the IRS came after him, and he lost everything. So if it could happen to the president's brother, it could happen to you. So which way are you going to remember, you know, the lesson better, the story or just the lecture? Right. So I have the financial material, but then I have all of these stories with them, fun, fascinating stories to make it really sink in, I think, and to make it something that teens enjoy and want to learn.
Excellent. So what are some of the repercussions that you've seen for a lack of financial training for young adults?
Well, you can see the repercussions everywhere. For instance, in savings rates in the United States. If you look at Exhibit 1, Exhibit 1 shows that over the 20 years previous to 1987, savings averaged over 11% of income, which is a reasonably good amount of savings for retirement. However, in 1987, savings rates began to fall, and they went negative in 2000 and 2006. There was a brief spike up in response to fears from the financial crisis, but then savings rates went down again. This decline in savings is particularly shocking for several reasons. When people get older, their savings rates should go up. Young people borrow to buy houses, cars, and educations. As they get older, their savings rates should rise as retirement approaches. These savings rates we are looking at have fallen despite the fact that baby boomers, who represent a large fraction of our population, are aging and are getting ready for retirement. The average monthly Social Security payout, for example, is $1,153. I mean, this is barely enough to live a starvation existence off of this. And even so, almost half of Americans over the age of 55 have saved around $50,000 for their retirement. That's almost nothing. It's not going to help them much in retirement. And this is despite the fact that we've been discussing at the national level how the Social Security is insolvent right now, and those payments are not particularly reliable. In addition, Americans have become addicted to credit card debt, which is very harmful, especially if you're borrowing money just to consume something, to buy something that goes away. That's very damaging to your wealth. And we even see this in college students. According to one survey, a typical college student borrows over $3,000 in credit card debt before they graduate. And since you know some students aren't taking out any credit card debt, that means others have a lot more than $3,000. You know, and then they go get a job for the first time and they have all these expenses, and the next thing you know, they have $10,000, $20,000 in credit card debt piled up.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention student loans as well.
Not to mention student loans. At least student loans, though, are an investment in your education, an investment in yourself. Those credit cards, they're not an investment in anything. Mm-hmm. They're just pure spending, and you're going to have to pay it all back with interest when you're done. In fact, in class, after I teach the time value of money, which has to do with understanding borrowing, I tell my students they don't have to answer, but I ask them how many of them have made a serious financial mistake that's really had a damaging effect on their lives, and the hands shoot up all around the classroom. So everywhere I look, people have been really harmed in some way or another by making some serious financial mistake. In fact, you can even see it in divorce rates. If you look at Exhibit 2, Exhibit 2 shows divorce rates in the United States from 1920 to 1988. Unfortunately, there isn't a consistently collected series to the present, but I think it will illustrate what's happening. With the exception of the beginning of the Great Depression and the post-World War II period, divorce rates have been generally rising since the data series starts. However, it appears there's a bright spot. The red dots indicate that divorce rates have been falling in more recent times. Unfortunately, the reason for this is that fewer and fewer people as a percent of the population are getting married in the first place. In other words, the reason there are few people getting divorced is that there are few people getting married.
Well, what does financial literacy have to do with divorce, though?
It turns out that many experts point to financial problems as the major contributor to divorce. And as you might imagine, it can create serious tension between spouses, either the fear from financial problems or disagreements over spending. It's often true that one spouse will be a spender and the other spouse will be a saver, and that can create enormous tension, as can the fear associated with having financial problems or may possibly even losing your house, something like that. In fact, I don't know how many people I've bumped into. I mentioned my textbook and they start talking about finance with me, and I don't know how many of them have said, yeah, I'm getting divorced, we lost our house and now I'm getting divorced, or whatever it is. So it's happening all over the place. In fact, financial trouble, I refer to it as dark matter. There's this theory in the cosmos that there's dark matter out there and you can't see it or measure it, but that it actually controls the movements of whole galaxies. And so I think there's dark matter in people's lives as well. And you can't see it either, but the effects that it has are very serious. You see people getting divorced, breaking up, and people moving away, and you don't know the reason. So why don't people see what this dark matter is? And the reason is fear and shame. When people get into financial trouble, they often feel very ashamed of themselves. Imagine having to come home to your spouse and kids and say you're losing the house, or You're going to have greatly reduced circumstances. You can't go to that nice school anymore, whatever it is. So there can be tremendous fear and shame associated with financial trouble. So you see all of these people getting angry, even violence is caused by it, depression, suicide, but you don't see why, because people don't talk about what the problem is. But it is a major force out there that's causing conflict between people.
Yeah, financial problems really can wreak havoc in the home.
Yes, they can. In fact, I can give you another example of that. Boomerang kids, they're called. There is a growing phenomenon of kids going to college, racking up student loans, and then dropping out. They're referred to as boomerang kids. And even at good colleges, the number of kids that are doing that are increasing. If kids had financial training, if they understood the consequences of dropping out of college and having all of those student loans with no job, college degree job, to cover them, then they might have the willpower to stay in college and finish, but they don't understand what's going to happen to them. They come home, they start living with mom and dad, who get increasingly frustrated with them, and their self-esteem drops. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was one study that found that dropout rates in college right now are almost as high as 46%. It's enormous, and the consequences are devastating. Mm-hmm. And you've got those student loans on your back, and you can't get rid of them either. You can't discharge them in bankruptcy either.
Right. So boomerang, because they started home and then they wind up right back there?
They end up right back at home again.
So it's clear that financial illiteracy can be very harmful to individuals. Now, on a more macro level, can you speak to what it's done to our nation as a whole?
Well, it's clear that people defaulting on mortgages is at the heart of the financial crisis. And I'm not going to go through all of the ways that happened and what caused the financial crisis, but it's very clear that people were taking out mortgages that they simply could not afford and started defaulting on them, and that's what basically caused this general crisis that we're in. Mm-hmm. In addition, people were taking out home equity loans on their house and spending the money, and they were borrowing heavily on credit cards. There's a basic truth to all of this. If people were financially literate and knew what was in their own plain best interest, the financial crisis never would have happened. I think we all know people who've been really hurt by this mess. In fact, if you look at Exhibit 3, you can see mortgage delinquency rates, and in fact, they have soared to well over 10% as a result of the financial crisis. You can also see from Exhibit 4 that we have not seen unemployment like what we have recently experienced in almost 30 years. The unemployment rate in this country rose above 10% and still has not fallen below 9%, several years after the crisis started. This crisis has led to instability and social unrest around the world, not to mention a deep recession which is lingering and we are having trouble recovering from. The result has been thousands of pages of financial reform. It's like a dog chasing its tail. So the financial institutions find ways to get money out of consumers. So eventually there's an outcry and new regulations are written. So then they find different ways to get money out of consumers. And then there are new regulations written. And the regulations keep piling up and piling up and piling up, and it becomes more and more expensive for these financial institutions to operate, and that ultimately drives up the cost of financial services to consumers. If consumers were well educated and financially savvy, we wouldn't need all these regulations to protect them, which end up being ineffective anyways. They'd be able to protect themselves. If you had training in how to fix a car, you wouldn't need lots of legislation to protect you. You'd know how to buy a car and how to fix your own car.
Now, how about in terms of national security? How do you see financial literacy impacting our nation's level of security?
Well, I think it puts our whole country at risk because in order to be strong as a country, you need to be financially strong. And this financial crisis has very seriously weakened us. We're very heavily in debt, and that makes it harder to defend ourselves and to promote our own national interests. It's also created riots all around the world, which also is threatening our own national security. Mm-hmm. Our elected representatives take our tax dollars and they spend it. And they also borrow money, which people will have to pay back later. If you look at what people have been doing, people everywhere have been getting into trouble with debt. So it's very clear that many Americans don't even understand debt. They don't understand the consequences of debt and what can happen to them. And we're seeing that reflected in what our politicians are doing. I don't think it's politically controversial to say that if Americans were financially literate they would be better watchdogs of our politicians. They would watch how our politicians are spending our money and borrowing.
So how do you see your book contributing to the solution and impacting our national level of literacy?
Well, I would ultimately like to see the financial curriculum in every high school. Unfortunately, what's out there right now is pretty feeble. It's just not very good. The textbooks are just designed to make young people hate finance. They're just black and white and very, very dry. The other thing, unfortunately, that I've seen is that at least in one state that I looked at, they hired a financial institution to write the textbooks for their curriculum. Well, why don't you ask a used car salesman to write a textbook on how to buy cars and give it to your kids to teach them? I mean, there's an obvious conflict of interest. You do not want people who are selling financial products and services teaching people how to buy financial products and services. There's very obviously a problem with that. And that's why educators need to step in, which is what I've done. I have no conflicts of interest. I'm not selling any kind of financial product or service, and I'm going to give you my direct and honest opinion. So what I'm hoping is that my curriculum will get spread in high schools, and in fact I'm starting online courses to train high school teachers how to teach teenagers finance in high school, and I'm going to be providing them with curriculums that they can use in their classroom. And also these online courses are going to be available to homeschooling parents as well in a separate class, so they can also learn how to teach their kids about finance. And frankly, the teachers and the parents are going to get quite a course in personal finance themselves.
Same thing.
You know, a lot of times the parents don't know how to teach their kids finance because they don't know it themselves. And I'm expecting that when these kids bring these textbooks home, the parents are going to read it. You know, there's great chapters in there on how to fund your kids' college and retirement and a whole lot of other things, and I can very much see the parents using it as a very valuable personal finance reference. I would encourage any educator or parent who's interested in promoting financial literacy for teens to visit my website. It's financialwisdompi.com. That's financialwisdompi.com. And take a look at my website and see what I have there to help you in your quest to help your teen learn finance. It'll have a big impact on their life if you do.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Forsyth. This
You're
has
most welcome.
really been very enlightening. So once again, that website is www.financialwisdompi, which stands for preparatoryinstitute.com. And you can also find Dr. Forsyth's book, Financial Wisdom, Personal Finance and Career Skills to Guide Teens and Young Adults on Their Journey to Success and Happiness, online at amazon.com and barnesandnoble.com. And thank you for joining us for this video interview of the Graziadio Business Review. For all the latest analysis and research, you can find us online at gbr.pepperdine.edu.